Completing quests in Oldschool Runescape is probably the most important thing you can do in the game, but in 2024 there are nearly 170 quests to do, so the task of getting the questscape is more monumental than when the game released. So although questing in general is amazing for an account and unlocks so many things, not all of them are that useful. So what are the most important quests to complete? Well, the most boring answer to this is all of them, of course, but that's not a very helpful answer, so let's have a look. Now I'm going to divide this into 3 different stages. We're going to start off with the fresh account stage. Literally brand new account. Most of these quests have little to no requirements. We'll have the early game stage, and the quests there will have some moderate requirements to them. And finally, we'll have the mid-game stage, which is going to be the higher level quests in the game. And yes, I'm not calling this late game because in no way should you wait until the end game to finish all the quests. And generally, the order you do finish quests in does matter. And I would try to finish the most important quests from each tier first before moving on, because they lose value the longer you put them off. Now the type of quests we're going to try to finish early on, like right after you make an account, are those that either give you good early game boosts of experience from the quest itself, or unlock a notable transportation method. In my opinion, these are the things you should focus on early with your questing because getting around the map sucks, and most of the best teleport methods are locked behind quests, and the early game experience rewards lose value over time, so you really want to finish them as early as possible. Now these aren't in particular order, but starting off here with a pretty quintessential one, Witch's House. It actually takes a while to get your hit points up in the early game, and Witch's House will boost you right to 23 hit points. This will allow you to survive most of the monsters that will be attacking you in the early game, and will make you a little beefier to finish the rest of the quests. Waterfall Quest is another cult classic, and for good reason. This one is essential to do early because it'll jump you right to 30 attack and strength, which is significantly quicker than just training through conventional methods. There's no reason to put this quest off, and doing it early is very nice. Now a quest that's kind of underrated to get done early is actually Fremennik Trials. It's a bit more advanced to do this at a low level because there is a bit of combat involved, but there is a misconception that this is not doable at level 3 because there are some skill requirements, but you can actually get around that by just killing a very low level NPC to get the lyre to complete the quest. There's also a combat section that will not allow you to use any weapons, but you can use Rings of Recoil to kill Thorvald the warrior, and that's the only section that requires some combat prowess. Now the benefit of completing this quest early is it gets you from level 1 to 17 in 10 different skills in agility, crafting, fishing, fletching, thieving, woodcutting, as well as all your melee combat skills as well. A bit more difficult to do early, but a good option if you're a more experienced player. Now by far the most important quest to get done to make the map easier to traverse is Fairy Tales Part 1 and starting Fairy Tales Part 2. This unlocks the Fairy Ring Network, which is by far the best transportation method in the entire game, and you can unlock it very early. Alongside you'll unlock Zenaris, which is useful for future quests, and you'll unlock Mauritania, a huge region with tons of content in it. On top of that you'll get the Magic Secateurs as well, which is a good unlock for farming. But mostly, Fairy Rings, so important. The early game is terrible without them. Now continuing on the trend of transportation, you'll want to complete the Grand Tree, which provides a good chunk of early game experience and unlocks the Gnome Glider system. And you'll also want to complete Tree Gnome Village, which also gives a good chunk of experience and unlocks the Spirit Tree Network. With those 3 quests and transportation methods unlocked, the map will be much easier to get around. In the end, will save you so much time with future questing. Now another quest that is amazing to get done early is Holy Grail, and that is strictly for the experience you get from the quest. It will get you all the way to 28 prayer and 31 defense from a singular quest and the pre-quest as well. So much experience, once again way easier than training them normally, and really isn't a very long quest either. Another good option early is Animal Magnetism. This will unlock the Aves Accumulator, which is pretty much required to train ranged later on, so it's good to get this done early. The accumulator will pick up the majority of your arrows and will just make range training so much nicer. Picking up arrows by hand is terrible, just don't do it guys, finish this quest. Now a really quick one is Druidic Ritual, which will unlock the Herblore skill. You'll want to get this done eventually because Herblore is an entire skill that has a lot of unlocks in it and will be required for future quests as well. This takes like 5 minutes, it's worth doing. Now, one quest that is definitely worth finishing early, strictly due to its time-gated nature, is the Tears of Guthix. This unlocks a minigame you can complete once per week that gives you a good chunk of experience in your lowest level skill. So the earlier you get this done, the more real-life time will pass, which will allow you to get more experience passively. Whether you hate mining, Slayer, rune crafting, whatever, as long as you keep it as your lowest level skill, you'll get passive experience in it, and the earlier, the better. And finally, I think a good way to send off the early game questing spree is with Bon Voyage. Bon Voyage mostly unlocks Fossil Island, which is a separate island with tons of content on it. It unlocks Birdhouse Runs, which is a good passive moneymaker in the beginning, Hardwood Tree Patches, Celius Up Mushroom Chopping, Driftnet Fishing, Slayer Tasks, new mining methods. It's a really good unlock to have early, mid, and late game, so I think it is really good to unlock early. Now that your account is a bit established, we're going to move on to early game quests, and these are mostly focused on unlocking specific items or spell books. The experience rewards aren't as important anymore because most of our skills are above a baseline level, so we're mainly shooting for content unlocks and item unlocks. Okay, so it's now time to move over to the early game quests. Now these can be done pretty quickly after making a new account, but they do have some moderate requirements to them. So starting off with an iconic one, Monkey Madness 1. This is mainly done to unlock the Dragon Scimitar, which is a pretty important early game training weapon. While not strictly required now with additions such as the Zombie Axe, the Dragon Scimitar is still going to be much more cost effective to get, and it's almost always worth doing a quest to unlock a strong weapon than just buying your way out of it. And in a similar vein, another quest that is definitely worth finishing early is the Fremennik Isles. This will unlock the Helm of Nita's Knot, and while again there is another option nowadays that you can buy, being the Blood Moon Helmet, I would still highly recommend unlocking this anyway. It's a pretty quick quest, and the Nezi Helm is a really powerful option that will carry you through the mid-game. Another new quest that I would definitely recommend finishing early is Perilous Moons. Perilous Moons unlocks a lot of good stuff for an early game account, including one of the most powerful training methods for melee combat being Sulphur Naguas, alongside unlocking probably the best mid-game moneymaker as well, which is killing the Perilous Moons, and unlocks more of Varlamore. Overall, definitely a worthwhile quest to finish, and gives you a ton of Slayer experience as well from the quest completion, which is pretty nice as well. Now, another decent quest to get done in the early game is the Underground Pass. Now, this not only is one of the precursor quests to the Elf storyline, but unlocks the Iban's Staff. Iban's Staff is by far the most powerful mage weapon in the mid game, and will be the best option until you unlock the Trident and kind of the Warped Scepter nowadays, but the Warped Scepter still doesn't surpass it until like 80 or something magic. So for something you can use right away at 50 magic, it is super strong, and there's really no other replacement for it. Desert Treasure 1 is another quest I would highly recommend finishing in the early game. This is because it unlocks the Ancient Spellbook, which has tons of useful spells on it, which will be required for PvM, as well as for quick magic training. While you're at it, you should unlock the Lunar Spellbook as well by completing Lunar Diplomacy. This once again has a bunch of PvM applications, and will just honestly offer a ton of new training methods for magic, as well as things like crafting, herb lore, cooking, and offers a huge swath of utility spells. Definitely worth unlocking when you can. Now, a quick quest I would recommend finishing is actually Dwarf Cannon, which, well, unlocks the Dwarf Cannon. The Dwarf Cannon is so powerful that if it was pulled today, there was 0% chance this item would pass. The only really gating factor to this item is the cost of cannonballs, so it's kind of expensive to use, but even if you're not going to use it right away, having it unlocked for later will be important. And finally, the most quintessential mid-game questline to finish is Recipe for Disaster. Now, there are multiple dozen subquests that are required to finish this questline, and you need 175 quest points to finish it, so it's no easy task. But for finishing it, you will get Barrow's Gloves, which are the strongest gloves you'll be able to wear for the foreseeable future, and even in the late game are still incredibly useful, and are free. There's no cost to it besides finishing all these quests, so it's definitely worth doing. Along the way, you will complete a ton of other quests as well, so there'll be tons of other minor unlocks along the way as well, but the main one is Barrow's Gloves, and that on its own makes this totally worthwhile, and is a great goal to go for early. Okay, so now we're moving on to the final part of questing that should hopefully be done somewhere in the mid-game. Now, all these quests do have significant requirements to them, either tons of other subquests, skill requirements, and will require you to kill some more difficult quest bosses. Now the focus of these are mainly on unlocking high-end bosses and moneymakers, but there are a few pieces of important gear that are unlocked as well. Now first up here we have the easiest of the sequel quests, that being Monkey Madness 2. Monkey Madness 2 is done to unlock two major pieces of content: demonic gorillas, which is a pretty good money-making method in the mid-game, as well as maniacal monkeys, which are by far the best monster to train magic on. Compared to the other sequel quests being Dragon Slayer 2 and Desert Treasure 2, it is a lot easier than those, I think. The final boss is much simpler, so shooting to finish this one first, I think makes sense. Next up here we have Dragon Slayer 2. Now Dragon Slayer 2 has higher requirements. You need 200 quest points straight up just to do the quest, and there are a lot of skill requirements as well. But for finishing it, you are going to get quite a few nice things. The Ava's Assembler is going to be your best in slot range cape for a long time. Ferocious gloves are unlocked from this quest as well, which are the best in slot melee gloves, super good, very cheap as well. And you're going to get Vorkath, which is a pretty decent, consistent money-making method. Now Kingdom Divided is a very important quest to finish for one major reason, and that is Thralls. Thralls are so powerful. You need to complete all of the Zaya quest line leading to a Kingdom Divided to get them. They're worth unlocking on their own, but you'll also get the upgraded Archaea spellbook, which has a bunch of useful spells on it as well. But Thralls are so good, you can use them in pretty much every situation and are just a straight up DPS increase for pretty much every encounter in the game. Now, the final quest in the Fremnik series is another important one to finish. While not strictly required, Fremnik Exiles does unlock one important thing, the Nediznat Face Guard, which is a really solid upgrade over the Helm of Nediznat, and is much cheaper than a Torva helm, so you will definitely want to finish this unless you have 200 mil laying around to buy the Torva helmet and skip it, but wouldn't really recommend that. Now Sins of the Father is a nice quest to finish because it unlocks a lot of skilling content with allowing you to enter Darkmire. Darkmire offers agility training method being the Hallowed Sepulchre, blood shard thieving, Vires, and even some rune crafting training methods as well. Compared to some of these other quests, the requirements aren't quite as high as well, making this definitely a worthwhile quest to finish on the earlier side. Beneath Cursed Sands is an important quest, mainly because it unlocks the Tombs of Masket. Now if you want to do a raid, this is probably the easiest one to get into, and Tombs of Masket isn't a terribly hard quest to finish. It doesn't have that many sub-quests to complete it. So it really only unlocks one piece of content, but that content is a raid, so there's a lot there. But this mostly just comes down to whether you want to do it or not. Worth completing eventually though. While Gothic Sleeps is one of the newest quests added to Old School, and you want to complete this for one major unlock, Tormented Demons. I've killed a lot of these recently, and Tormented Demons are an incredibly profitable and high experience monster to kill, so just even though that's all it unlocks, it's worth it because it's a very good way to train Slayer, make money, and you can do this with a low Slayer level. Now Song of the Elves is one of my favorite quests because it unlocks Prifddinas, and similar to Darkmire, Prifddinas unlocks a ton of skilling and money making options from things like the Gauntlet, Elf Thieving, Zalcano, new agility courses, hunter training methods. The city really has a lot to offer, albeit it does have one of the highest requirements for a quest in the game and a pretty difficult boss fight. And finally here we have arguably the most difficult quest to complete in the game, and that is Desert Treasure 2. Desert Treasure 2 requires you to kill 4 pretty difficult bosses that will unlock repeatable variants once you've completed the quest. Now, the reason you might want to finish this quest is to unlock these bosses. They are incredibly profitable, offering up to like 6-7 mil per hour, depending on the prices of the rings. But like I said, it is the most difficult quest, and I think by a reasonable margin as well. And if you want to kill the Whisperer, Vardorvis, Duke, or Leviathan, you have to finish this quest. So that is all the important quests in Old School, starting from ones you would complete early to the most difficult quests in the game. Now, if you just finish all of them on this list, you will have completed probably like 90% of all the quests in Old School, so the next step would just be to get a quest cape, which probably won't take that long at this point. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.